There's another shot of the chimney with the smoke coming out. About 3 months into her internment, 2 young girls were captured trying to escape. Everyone in the camp was marched into lines and forced to witness their hanging. My grandmother tried to turn her face away, but the guards slapped her. The 2 girls came out carrying their 2 stools to the gallows. As the girls were hanged, one of them spit on the female SS guard and yelled out, "Never forget, take revenge." My mother says the young girl's outcry gave her courage to survive, so she would be a living witness. She was overwhelmed with the young girl's bravery, and the bodies of these 2 girls were left outside for several days as a reminder to the inmates what their fate would be if they disobeyed or tried to escape. While in Majdanek, my mother contracted dysentery, but her mother was somehow able to nurse her back to health. At the end of their 6-month stay, my mother and grandmother went through their 2nd selection. The first one was when they got off the train and were sent to the right. This time, my mother was selected to go to the right, but my poor grandmother was sent to the left. And for the first time, my mother was separated from her mother. Then they were sent to 2 different barracks. And the next morning, before my mother's departure and journey to the next death camp, my mother saw her mother for the last time. Okay. Wait just a minute, we're going to get the... Okay.
There was another big selection. You had to take off your clothes completely. And this was outside. The selection was taking place. When I came with my mother in front of him, he sent my mother to the left and me to the right. I don't know if you know what it means. The left was always to your death, and the right was still maybe hoping to another camp or again, to work. So my mother was taken away from me, and they sent me on the right side, which was supposedly will go to Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau. After this selection, they took us, all the girls, what they were selected to go to Birkenau, Auschwitz, to another field. And we stayed overnight, I'll never forget this in my life, in this particular big barrack. And in the morning, they made a Blocksperre. A Blocksperre meant everybody had to be inside. And they, usually with a big whistle, they let you know. You had to be all inside. When this happened, we knew always something is occurring. So I want you to know that this was all the women, what they were selected to their death to go to the gas chamber, were marching from that field where I was before. And I was very curious. I went, to the big door what we had in this particular barrack, and I could only just a little space open and to look. And this was my last, vision of my mother when she walked to her death, knowingly, with another lady I'll never forget from my hometown too. They were kind of holding each other, also, in rows of 5. So this was the night that I really fell apart before the next day they sent us, by the trains to Birkenau, Auschwitz. So this was, I lost my mother there.
This is the actual gas chamber where my grandmother was gassed. Oh, I'm sorry. Gotta put the mic back on. You good now? Can you hear me? No? Okay. Okay, so this, whoops, it's a little loud. Thank you. Okay, is that okay now? Yeah. It is? Okay. So this is the actual gas chamber where my grandmother passed away. And that's a close-up of it. The next day, in the fall of 1943, my mother was put on another train, which took her to Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp, where she was imprisoned for about a year and a half. This time, when she got off the train, she was sent directly to the showers where her head and entire body were shaved. After being there a few days, she was also assigned a number 48689, that was tattooed on her arm with a triangle indicating that she was a Jew. She was assigned to another barrack. This one was close to one of the gas chambers and crematorium where the bodies were burned. This is an interesting photo because, first of all, this is where my mother's barrack was, and this is where crematorium 2 was. One day she was home, she got Life magazine, and this was in Life magazine, an aerial view of Auschwitz that was taken by the Americans. And she couldn't believe it because that's where she was, and here's the crematorium. Now, this is a model that is, I believe, in Washington, D.C., of that crematorium. And so you can see here where they bring the people in, they disrobe, they're gassed, and then they're put on elevators that took them up to this level where they're put into the ovens. And there's a closer shot of what was left after the war. So every morning, just like the previous death camp, her day started at 5 a.m. with the roll call and ended in the evening with another count. The food ration was a cup of hot water in the morning and 2 slices of bread and soup served while working. Her soup tin always hung from her waist by a string. In this camp, her work included hard labor, carrying stones, building roads, working in the fields, spreading human feces on the fields for fertilizer, and braiding fabric ropes to carry bombs onto the planes. She endured 2 major beatings while at Auschwitz-Birkenau. One was given by a brutal female SS guard while she was working building roads. One day she tried to hide in the latrine, and the guard found her and beat her up. Another beating took place after an SS officer tested one of the braided ropes and wasn't satisfied with its strength. Since my mother was in charge, he beat her up and knocked out her 2 front teeth. During her time in this death camp, she went through 4 selections. And I think I'm going to skip a little bit so she can have more time to talk to you, but she did go through 4 major selections, and she was able to escape a couple of them by doing certain things. Once after scrubbing the barracks floor, she developed a serious infection in her thumb. Her thumb turned black and a red streak ran up her arm, which meant she had developed gangrene. One of her friends in the camp saved her life by applying a black ointment to her thumb and immersing it in hot water. After 3 days, the wound finally opened and eventually healed. She witnessed many brutal beatings, hangings, people thrown into open latrine pits to drown, truckloads of children sent to the gas chambers, entire section of barracks filled with gypsies that was set on fire to burn to the ground, and people dying of typhus and other illnesses due to starvation and to the total lack of medical attention. After 1.5 years of living in what my mother described as hell, she was about to be a witness and survivor of another infamous camp, Bergen-Belsen. In January of 1945, as the Russian army was approaching Auschwitz, most of the inmates were forced to go to another camp, but this time they were not put on trains. They were marched on foot in the snow for several days and nights. They were given one blanket, wooden shoes, a small portion of horse meat, half a loaf of bread, and used the snow for water. This was a death march where many people collapsed and died. Some were shot as they were marching. The guards would shoot their rifles in the air over the marching columns, which were 5 deep, to keep them walking at a rapid pace. My mother made sure she was in the middle of the columns so that her odds of being beaten were less, and if she were having trouble keeping up, it wouldn't be noticed. The guards announced from time to time that if you no longer could walk, you could go on the sled. However, everyone knew that if you made that choice, you'd be taken to the forest and shot dead. Her friend marching next to her made that decision, telling my mother, "I just can't go on anymore." Finally, after several days of walking in freezing weather with no rest, they spent the night on a farm. Some, like my mother, were able to pile into a large barn to sleep on hay stacks. Others had to sleep outside. The next morning, they walked to the train station and once again piled into cattle cars, this time with no roof because it was wintertime. As they were en route to their final destination, my mother could see houses with lights on, and she so desperately wondered why she and all those were suffering and couldn't be safe and warm again with their family. It seemed so unfair and impossible to understand why they were suffering so much. Once the train stopped because the planes overhead were bombing and all the guards ran to safety under the trains. My mother had hoped that the bombs would hit their train, but it didn't. When the train continued again, they ended up in Dachau, where she was placed on an open truck and sent to her final destination, the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. My mother says when she got off the truck, she couldn't believe the human condition that she was witnessing in front of her, even after all she had just been through. Death was everywhere, dead bodies, people suffering and dying of typhus, people dragging bodies to the crematoriums. In her new barracks, she slept on the floor. People were dying around her daily. Fortunately, she was given an indoor job peeling rutabagas. As the Germans were losing the war, the SS officers and guards started to desert the camp. On April 15, 1945, my mother says there were only 2 SS guards in her work area. That day, while at work, she walked out to the latrine and could feel the earth shaking and hear the British tanks in the distance. She was so excited to think that perhaps she would soon be free. This was the day of my mother's liberation, but it ended in a much different way. Okay, we're ready.
One day, when we were at work, we noticed that something is happening. We did not see that many SS women being there in the kitchen where they usually guard us, and men also, SS men. So we knew something is going on, and already whispers that the liberation is someplace not too far away. I was very curious, and I was sitting right, on a bench there with some other girls from France, where I remember. And we had, I explained to you, it was like a barn at a very, very wide opening, like a, door. And I was very uneasy. I said, well, I will go out to the latrine, and you could have a longer view, because Bergen-Belsen also a very big camp. And while I was there looking out, because you could hear already the noise from the earth, that something is coming, like how do you call it? The vibration, yes. The vibration of the tanks. You could hear tanks are coming. And I knew this must be our liberation. I was so excited. Until, coming in back to my place, to this, in the barn. And meanwhile, where does the Hungary go? I mentioned to you before, the men's camp was just across. They opened pried the doors, the gates, and they all were piling to the kitchen. So while, they were all piling, the guard was still guarding in front of the kitchen. And I was trying, you know, the girls were very excited, and I want to, you know, already tell them too that I have seen, you know, the tanks are coming. And I was standing just like this, and he was shooting from a very short, you know, distance, and the bullet, you know, came in through here and came out through here. A centimeter from my heart, centimeter from my lungs. And meanwhile, outside, the English were already there, and they had all of these women, where I showed you here, you know, can I show it, you know, again? They were all standing, you know, out there on the platform, and the main assessment who ran the camp, he was all standing with their hands up. And I'll never forget in my life, when I got the bullet, you just don't notice. You don't know what happened to you. I just felt something like, and I noticed blood is coming out of my, I didn't even notice this place. I noticed that I have blood coming out of my mouth. I want you to know that I was drinking that blood, just thinking, God, after I went through so much, in the day here in the liberation, I have to perish. In the meanwhile, I'll never forget, a Russian man who came in from the camp, one of our, you know, inmates, and he picked me up, and he took me to the, you know, to the window in the kitchen, and he said in Russian to me, look out and see, before you die, the liberation.
So this is, can you hear me? Oh my God, that's horrible. Okay, now? Wait, okay. So this is what liberation looked like that day. And here's some more scenes from liberation. And you know, I'm going to stop my presentation now because we're getting close